Welcome to Mentoring Moments. Mentoring Moments is a sub-series of the E-commerce Edge podcast. It is composed of clips taken from Jason's one-to-one and group mentorship sessions.
You like chasing freedom, okay? What exactly does that mean, and why is it taking you all over the world to where you are now?
Yeah, look, I think freedom means different things to different people. For me, it means doing what I want, when I want, with who I want, how I want, as much as I want. That's for me, that's what freedom really means. And there's different levels of freedom. For me, financial freedom, location freedom, business freedom, all those things are really important to me and my wife. And I guess we learned a really harsh lesson during COVID when we lived in New Zealand, because I was born and raised in Southern California, moved to New Zealand with my family in my early 20s, lived in New Zealand for almost 30 years, married a Kiwi. My wife's a Kiwi. She's Asian, but she's born and raised in New Zealand. And both her and I, we love to travel. We love to see the world through different lenses. We love to meet different people, different cultures, different food, different languages, different everything. And what we learned during COVID is that New Zealand is not as free as it likes to pretend it is. And for any of your audience that don't know, New Zealand and Australia were the two of the most locked down countries in the entire world.
Really bad.
We couldn't leave New Zealand for 3 years. We could leave, but we couldn't come back in because they had a quarantine, the borders were closed, that whole thing. And so for big travelers like me and my wife, that was like, it was almost torture, right? And then you layer on top of that, my wife and I don't vaccinate and will, and there were two distinct levels of freedom even within New Zealand that the government was very open about. You're going to have a lot less freedom if you choose not to vaccinate. You're going to have a lot more freedom if you do. And then they brought in rules. Luckily, I don't work for the government, but then the government brought in mandates for almost all government employees. They brought in mandates for many industries. And then within the lockdowns, unless you were vaccinated, unless you had your vaccine card, there was most public places you couldn't go to.
The vaccine passports.
They were even arresting people at the beach. That just goes to show you that this was tyranny of the highest order.
And there was never at any point in time amongst the scamdemic, as I like to call it, there's never at any point in time that any of the science, like even on the extreme side, the stuff that we know is wrong now, but we believe back then, at no point in time were people worried about being in open doors. So the fact that we were like because there were other places that were arresting people that were on the beach. So it's like that it didn't even line up with the things that at the time they were saying not to do. So it was just absolutely insane. I agree with you.
Yeah. And we could the rules at different times, they varied at different times depending on the stoplight color that we were in and everything else. But you couldn't go more than 15 kilometers from your house. There was all sorts of weird and wonderful rules that it was even hard to keep up with. The changing of the rules was so frequent that it was actually hard. I think they did it intentionally so that you had to stay glued to your TV set. You had to stay glued to the news to even know what the level of rules were at any given point in time. And certainly that ratcheted up the fear factor, that ratcheted up the fear quotient so that they could take more control, take more freedom away from people. So there was a lot of people. I have a really good friend, for example, who's a career airline pilot for Air New Zealand. He'd been a pilot for over 30 years. And he said, Jason, look, the airlines were one of the first to implement vaccine requirements. And basically they said, this is your option. You either get vaccinated or you lose your job. That's your choice. And the government is fond of saying today, oh, well, we never had vaccine mandates. We never required people to take vaccines. You've always had a choice. Well, sure, technically speaking, maybe you had a choice, but for people that their livelihood was working in hospitals, and maybe they were nurses, or maybe they were doctors, or maybe they were cabbies, or maybe they worked in restaurants, or maybe they were an airline pilot. For those people, they didn't have a choice. My friend is the primary breadwinner in his house. He's got a $500,000 mortgage. He's got 2 car payments. He could have, said no, but then he would have lost his job, and he would have lost his home, and he would have lost his cars, and he'd have been out on the street. So the reality is that any government that says that they gave their people a choice, but actually had vaccine mandates, maybe they didn't pin people down and stick it in their arm.
It was very clearly, I was working at an incredibly liberal leaning tech company, right? And everybody knows California, it's a special place. And I don't mean that.
I know. I like to call it California.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And, look, a lot of great people that work there and stuff like that. But one of the things that we faced was, I'll never forget this. I'm very much like an independent person. I'm not loyal to any particular party, But I am very, like you, mindful of when I'm getting pressured about something. It's like, why am I being pressured about this? And hey, I did get vaccinated, not with the first round, but we had 2 newborn twins. We didn't know what was going on. The first round, I was like, I'm not taking some experimental drug. The second time, it was like, this is at least the second round. And there were people that were like younger and healthier that were getting sick. And I'm like, okay, if it'll help, the data is showing it at least helps keeping you from getting really sick. So if that'll do that and prevent me from passing it on to my newborns, I'll give it a shot. But that was my choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
The company that I was working for at the time was not giving people that choice. They were pretty much saying, making all these special rules. And we had a girl that was on my team who could not have almost any of the vaccinations, even the standard ones, because she had a condition that, guess what? With any vaccine that gets used, the way that they do it has some type of chemical in it that can lead for people with her condition to have blood clotting. Mm-hmm. Guess what have we seen recently? So her doctor, it had nothing to do with politics. He's like, listen, given your history, there's nothing different about this vaccine than the other ones. There has to be, you'd have to take it orally or like some other way. And at the time, there wasn't anything like that. So she just couldn't take it. They left it up to our manager whether or not to fire her. And he told her that because he was fortunately a level-headed human being. She was the second highest performer on the team. She was awesome. Everybody loved her. And we were all working remote. We weren't even going anywhere. And they literally were just like, yeah, it's up to you if you want to fire her. We all experienced this. So I think that when it comes to personal freedom, the things of what you're saying of success, to me, living the life the way we want to live is just doing what I want, when I want. We've all heard that. It's a very common definition. I think it's a good one. But what that's turned out to be has really changed over the years. And I'll tell you, for me, the thing that's shocking, I think, is I am not a fan of the mainstream media at all, especially here in the States. It has gone from at least pretending to check the government to full-blown propaganda machine. And I thought during COVID that, again, not pointing out any political party, right? Because on both sides, you've got your echo chambers.
Terrible all the way around.
Totally. So I thought we had really learned our lesson as a population of we can't trust these people. Right? Yeah. The vice president, or the guy that's, oh my gosh, Tim Walz, the guy who's running for vice president now, right? He said he likes to come out and say, oh yeah, from Minnesota, we believe in just letting people live the life they want. It's like, dude, you literally set up a call line with taxpayer dollars for people to rat out neighbors who weren't like social distancing and stuff like that. It's like you did the exact opposite of that. And again, not picking a side one way or the other for this podcast, but it's like, the point is, we've forgotten this stuff. The general population has just let it go.
A lot of that behavior has been memory hold too. So intentionally.
Oh yeah, they're backtracking on all of it. Oh, we never did that. And dude, there are
we never had
video clips of
mandates. We never had all these things. Luckily, there was a lot of people like me at the time that took screenshots of mainstream news articles and mainstream videos and download. I was like, I know how they're going to do this. I know exactly what's going to happen. And
you've read 1984.
Yeah, exactly. And I know how this works and how this stuff gets memory hold. And it was like, no, actually, this is what happened. No, that this was tyranny. No, this was in the name of the greater good. We're going to take away freedoms. We're going to scare people to death. So they'll give
Safety is the word nowadays.
Yeah, in New Zealand, they use terms like you're going to kill granny if you don't get vaccinated. You're going to kill your kids if you don't get vaccinated. That's the language that was literally being used. If you go to a wedding, if you go to a large group event, if you go to these things and you're not vaccinated, you will kill people. And so that's the kind of emotive language that they were using.
Let me ask you this, because this gets to something that I'm passionate about. When I work with people in my masterminds, I always tell people, I'm like, you are the hero of your story. And the villain that you are facing is twofold, right? They go hand in hand together. The first one is distraction. And distraction is the thing that is holding % of people away from getting what they want in life, right? Like it's almost everybody, with a handful of exceptions of things that I can think of. On the other side of it, the other enemy that we have to face is society. Now, society, people are like, okay, define that, Stephen. And it's society is not inherently evil. Society is just a machine, but it has to have your four most precious resources, which is your time, energy, money, and attention in order to function. So
Yes.
its job as society is to get as much of those things from you as it can. And society is just, it's the government, it's the media, it's your parents' expectations of you, it's your job and workplace, it's your church, it's all of these
Neighbors.
things. Right? Neighbors. So it's anything that is external to your family that wants to use your four resources. That is
Yep.
society. And again, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. There's certain parts of society that are good, there's some are bad. But the problem that I have and that I work with people on is that, are you letting society make the decisions for you, or are you choosing that? So the question that I have for you is, you have made some very extreme moves, right? You left California, you went to New Zealand, you were there for a long time. Now you're in Mexico. You're constantly chasing that. What kind of things help you remove yourself, or maybe not even remove yourself, but take a step back from societal pressures, recognize them, and then course correct to make sure that you're staying on par with the things that are important to your life?
I think there's probably two things that stand out to me in response to this. One is I was raised to be an independent thinker by my parents from the time I was a little kid. Now, that was a double-edged sword for my parents because I was a strong-headed little shit when I was young.
My parents had
And
the same issue, man. I love it.
so they raised me to not follow the crowd, to think my own thoughts, to make my own way in the world, to not follow what society says are the right things to do. I didn't get married until I was well into my 40s, right? I'd never been married before. Don't want kids. My wife doesn't want kids. I have, in every single thing that I've done in my life, it has never been a crowd following exercise. I have never done anything to try to fit in, to try to make friends, to like, I'm friendly. I think I'm very friendly, and I think I make a great friend, and I think I make a very loyal friend, but I'm not going to sacrifice my beliefs, my ethics, and my morals to have a friend. Let's put it that way. And I was raised that way, and luckily my parents supported that. I remember back when I was in high school, my Spanish teacher, she would say basically, Jason doesn't pay attention in class. She would give me discipline notices because I was too chatty in class, et cetera, et cetera. And finally my mother rang up the school and asked to speak to this teacher of mine, and she said, "What grade is my son currently getting in your class?" And I was getting like a B. And she said, "Is it possible that someone that is not paying attention as much as you say he's not paying attention, and if he's talking as much as you're saying he's talking, and he's not doing the lessons, he's not doing all these things, how is it possible that he's getting a B in your class? Wouldn't he be getting an F? Like, if he wasn't paying attention, he wasn't
Right.
doing any of the class, and he wasn't doing the classwork, and he wasn't doing his homework, then how is it that he's,
He's still being
he's clearly
relatively
not cheating?
successful. Right.
He's clearly not cheating in your class. Otherwise, you would have written him up for cheating. He's clearly not cheating, but he's maybe not doing it exactly the way you would like him to do it. He has his own
Right.
way of doing things. He has his own way of learning. And as long as he's passing the tests and he's contributing, isn't that really what matters? And wouldn't he be failing if he wasn't? And she didn't really have an answer to that. And I just remember this. To this day, I remember that because my mom and dad didn't just automatically take the side of authority and say, "You need to buck up, you need to cower before authority." No,
Right.
they would expect me to make my case to them, and they would question me and they would say, "Are you being disruptive? Are you not doing the homework? Are you not doing the things you're supposed to be doing?" No, actually I am, and my grades show that. They would allow me to make my case basically to them, and they wouldn't automatically take the side of authority over me. And I think that taught me a super valuable lesson from a very young age, which is to say, look, you have to live life your way. You're going to have to, when you get out of school, when you get out into the workforce, when you get out into the big bad world, you're going to have to figure out a way to make your way in this life. And it may not be doing all the mainstream things. I never went to university. I never got a degree. I have a very successful company now.
How is that possible? No.
Yeah, how are those kinds of things possible? Luckily, my dad was an entrepreneur. He never had a university degree, so I learned from him as I was growing up. So I guess that's the first thing. So first thing was I was taught to be independent from the time I was very young. Secondarily, I have never been one to allow fear to rule my life. ever.
Good.
Not to say I don't occasionally have fear, not to say that I don't
Right.
occasionally have concerns about the world or have concerns about finances or that I don't have concerns about making sure that my family's happy or all those things. I still have the normal concerns I think that every human being with a heart has. If you're an empathetic human being,
Right.
I think you do worry about the world. You do worry about your community. You do worry about
Everyone
animals.
everyone faces fear. It's a natural thing. The question is, like you said, do you let it rule you?
But I haven't ever let it dictate any of my decision making.
Love that.
And I think that's a really important factor for me. And
Okay.
if you would listen to the, State Department of the United States, for example, you'd think that if you traveled, set one foot inside Mexico, you're likely to get murdered, right?
Right.
So, and lots of people feel that way, and mainstream media plays that up. They play up the cartel violence. They play
They
up
do.
all those things. They play up the stats. And if you allowed yourself to succumb to that fear, then in my case, we would have missed out on an incredible opportunity to explore
Mm.
this beautiful country and create a really amazing lifestyle for ourselves here. And I just think that fear is a normal, natural reaction to a threat. That is normal. But I think the moment you start letting that dictate your actions instead of reason, logic, research, when you start letting fear and that fear response in the brain, that alien brain, the reptilian brain,
Yep.
if we let that control us instinctively, I think that puts people in a really bad place. And those are the two big things that stand out to me.
No, I love that you said that, because we talked a lot about overarching powers and how media and government, all these other things. And if you've ever read the book by Michael Crichton, The State of Fear, it's a great book. He's the guy that did Jurassic Park, all this other stuff. And it's a fantastic book. But I want to ask you about the fear that I find holds people back. So you and I both own our own business. Okay. And the thing that I'm finding that's happening more and more often with people that I work with is that they are interested in leaving the corporate world and potentially starting their own business, or they're interested in leaving the position they're at and maybe going to a different company. A lot of people are dissatisfied with their existing work and they are looking for changes. But the number one thing that they come to me for, whether they recognize it or not, that we eventually run into is certain kinds of fears, right? Whatever it may be. Could be financial, could be shame, whatever the case is. So when you have to go through a change in your life, whether that's moving from New Zealand, where you've lived for 30 years, to go to a place like Mexico, maybe it's, like you said, when you moved, that's massive different time changes that had to have a huge impact on your business and probably clientele, different things like that. Talk to me about some of the recent life changes that you've made, the fears that were associated with it, and then how you overcame it and what happened.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that has led to a place where I can make decisions in a more clear-headed way with less fear being involved in that decision making. This is going to sound strange, but not having any debt. Not having any debt. People that have debt in their lives, okay, they have certain obligations to repay that debt that restrict their flexibility and decision-making ability.
It's a ball and chain for sure.
And you've got a $500,750 in New Zealand, the average mortgage now is over $1 million. Okay,
USD.
So the NZD, which is about 6 to 1 to the NZD. So equivalency is, let's say that would be roughly an average of a $500,000 to $600,000 mortgage in USD terms.
That's about what we're creeping up to here, so it makes sense.
If that's the average, right? And then the average Kiwi also has a car payment. The average Kiwi also has credit card debt, and they also have personal loans. And then finally, a lot of them have student debt. So, and that's extremely common. It's extremely common.
Our Kiwi brethren have a lot in common with their U.S. brethren. Let's put it that way.
And so as a result of that, when you are staring down the barrel of $1 million+ worth of debt, it severely limits your freedom, because
completely.
You got to repay the debt, you got to make those monthly payments, and especially when interest rates go up, as they have over the last couple of years to combat inflation, all of a sudden that starts to take a larger and larger portion of your disposable income.
Absolutely.
And just by definition, it limits your ability to save. It limits your ability to invest. It limits your ability to build up a cash cushion and runway. So just to give you an example, so when I first went back out on my own and started my own consultancy 4 years ago, I started out with it as a side hustle. I also, because I was part owner in an agency at that time, I had a client who wanted to engage with me directly outside of the agency. And I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to use this client as that soft cushion to leave the agency, sold my share of the agency back to the founder of the company, who's a very good friend of mine. And I knew, I was like, okay, I need to save up like at least 6 months worth of living expenses before I fully go out on my own, so that I'm not worried about paying my bills in that inevitable ramp up time between starting this new venture and having a full pipeline of clients. That's going to take anywhere from 6 to 12 months.
Okay.
So I thought, okay, cool. Let's save up a pile of cash. Let's set that aside for the inevitable buildup that's going to be required, right? We did
How
that.
long in advance from the time that you knew you wanted to do that to the point when you left? How long did that take you?
It was about 6 months.
About 6 months.
About 6 months beforehand, I started stacking cash up specifically with the expectation it's going to take me a while to build a pipeline, right?
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, it didn't take as long as I thought it might, and things took off pretty quickly from there. But I didn't want that hanging over my head. I didn't want that guillotine hanging over my head, and that I didn't want that to contribute to the stress and the fear of going out on my own, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's the first thing. Second of all, I think any type of planning that you do in advance starts to eliminate fear. When you take concrete actions, when we were, my wife and I, we put up our tiny, because we were living in an off-grid tiny house that we owned in New Zealand at the time. We're renting the land that it was on. So luckily, we had a really low cost every single month. We had a low cost base that we're operating from. But we also put up our tiny house straight away. We applied for temporary residency in Mexico. You have to do it outside of Mexico, so we did it through our local consulate in Wellington. We were taking little concrete steps every single day towards a potential goal. And just taking action alleviates fear.
Love it.
Doing research,
yes.
Doing your homework, watching YouTube videos. We were watching YouTube
that
videos.
1% concept, just a little bit every day.
A little bit every day. And that will slowly start to alleviate your fear. So for me, I think it's taking action, giving yourself a financial cushion, getting out of debt, making sure you've got some decent savings up your sleeve, and then planning with as much detail as makes sense to do so for whatever it is you're going to do. I think those things will help to eliminate fear.
It's almost like this is a commercial for my mastermind, because this is literally exactly what I do. I love everything that you just said. Because it's true. What I tell people is, I'm like, listen, I love everything about what you just said, because it doesn't matter what kind of move that you want to make, right? Whether you're thinking about having kids and you want to start preparing for that, or whether you want to make a big job move or go from New Zealand to Mexico, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But it's the thing that most people treat it like a mountain climber who's at the base and they're staring up at the peak, and then they start climbing. They just stare at the peak the whole time and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm not making any progress. I'm never going to get there. It's so high up. And it's, think about it, that's stupid. Nobody climbs a mountain that way. It's like, what you do is you go, you look over the peak, okay? You take a couple steps, you stop, make sure that you're heading in the right direction, okay? And then you take a couple more steps. So it's what you're talking about, is what I call the 3 tools that you need are a telescope, a microscope, and then a financial plan. The telescope gives you extreme clarity where you want to be in the long term. The microscope gives you extreme clarity on what you have to do today. And then you just need, once you figure those things out, you figure out what the cost of these things is roughly going to be. I tell people then add 20 to 30% on top of it, because we tend to severely underestimate what things are. And then you just keep moving forward. So every single thing that you said, I 100% am on the same page with you, because it's like the easiest way to overcome those fears is not by trying to bite the whole thing off. It's like, just nibble at it. So
yeah,
it's
one bite at
great.
a time. It's one of my favorite sayings. Eat the elephant one bite at a time.
Yep, that's it. Let me ask you this. So I know that you and I are both LinkedIn guys, and we've been on there, and that's where we get a lot of our business. I think people maybe in the past year or two have really started to wake up and realize that LinkedIn is no longer just a place where you upload your resume and go and look whenever you're trying to find a new job thing. So one of the things that I think is always really interesting for people who are looking for different types of freedom, whether it's something like a nomadic lifestyle like yours, or if it's something on the spectrum of just, I don't want to drive through an hour of traffic every morning and coming back home every single day when I just sit on my computer all day and my job can be done there. Obviously, some jobs you got to be there physically for. A lot of them you don't. For the people out there who are considering starting a side hustle, who are, in a similar position where you were when you had your agency and then you were like, I think I'm going to peel off and do my own thing. Talk to me a little bit about the experience that you have had building a following and a personal brand on LinkedIn, and let's get into the details a little bit of how you use that to bring income into your business and for your life.
Yeah, great question. Look, I think that the key here is that I started building an audience, or I started putting out content, or I started building a personal brand long before I ever needed it. And I think that's probably the fatal flaw. It's a massive problem if you're looking to build an audience quickly. First of all, it's very difficult to build an audience quickly. It takes time. Second of all, it takes time to refine your content to where it's relevant, it's good quality, it makes sense to people, it resonates with people. They say your vibe attracts your tribe. It takes a while to attract your tribe to your content.
How long did you get started before you did it, and why did you do it?
I did it, and look, I got to give credit where credit is due. I did it mainly because of Gary Vee. So I had been listening to Gary Vee for a couple of years, and the guy just kept hammering home, hey, if you think you're a thought leader, put your thoughts out there and let the market decide. And he just kept saying that over and over again. And I thought, I've got some interesting things to say. I've been in this industry for a long time. I got some learnings I can share. And he really took the pressure off by saying, look, when you start out, your content's probably not going to be that good, but you're not going to have an audience then either. And so as your quality gets better, you're in parallel with your quality, both your production and the types of content you're putting out, and you're discovering what pillars of content you want to speak about on a regular basis that are around your series of knowledge and your skills. He said that will grow in parallel with your audience. And so don't worry about, it's not like you're going to start out and have 100,000 people interested in what you got to say.
Right.
So you don't really need to worry about the quality. It's about exercising the muscle.
Yes.
You don't build a muscle overnight in the gym. If you go to the gym consistently for a year and then you look in the mirror, geez, okay, I'm starting to see some.
I like that. I like that word that you were talking about. You earn it. You earn your audience. No, there are very few. I think sometimes we'll look at celebrities who maybe get famous. You've got like the Hot Tua girl right now and a bunch of other things. And it's, there's people that have their 15 minutes of fame type thing. But it's like anybody who lasts for anything longer than 15 minutes, it's like they earned it. And I really like what the bell curve, and you're right, Gary Vee talks about that a lot of is, listen, when you start off, your stuff's probably going to suck, but nobody's ever going to see it, and they're definitely not going to remember it because it does suck. And it's, I don't know if you know this girl. There is a girl named Rebecca Black
yes, of course, the Friday song girl.
Okay, the song, right? This thing came out when we were young. And my kids, I have a 7-year-old and 4-year-old. My 7-year-old just heard of it the other day. He's like, Dad, can you play this Friday song? And it like brought back memories. And I was like, what Friday song? And it was the same one. I just found the other day. I was like, I wonder what she's up to, and looked her up. She's actually got a career in music. I think she's like a DJ or something. And I'm like, congrats to her. She put out so for the point of this is, if you think your stuff is going to suck, just know that it probably will when you start. But Rebecca Black was a high schooler who made one of the worst songs of all time. It went viral. And years later, she's living a life she loves, making music of all things. And she has hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of listeners. So it's even something that could be a viral failure.
Yes.
Can eventually translate to success if you want it bad enough. So I totally agree with you. It's, if you feel you have something to say, just get started and worry about the details later. That's great.
Totally. And find a format that you can be consistent with. Find a format you can be comfortable with. That's
video, text, pictures. There's a lot of ways to do it.
Long form written, short form written, social, medium, wherever it is that you feel comfortable producing content. But I always say, tiptoe outside of those comfort zones as soon as you possibly can, because
Yeah.
when I started making video very early on, because I like the sound of my own voice and I've never been shy, I've never been an introvert, so it's never been an issue for me to make video. But I tell you, if I hadn't have started making video and figuring out editing and all that sort of stuff very early on in my content journey, then today, with short form video being all the rage, I would have to start from scratch on learning how to do all that stuff.
That's
You know,
that's a really good point.
and when I went from an audio only podcast to a video and audio podcast, I would have also had to learn all those processes again. But
Yes.
because I was producing video from very early on in my content career, and again, it wasn't the best content out there, but it was exercising the muscle of recording,
And you had
downloading,
fundamentals.
editing, doing post-production, doing the uploading, understanding how YouTube works, all that sort of stuff, to where now with my podcast, I drop 3 video and audio podcasts per week. And I also now just started putting out Spanish versions of the podcast as well using
Oh,
HeyGen.
wow. Okay.
And I do all the recording, I do all the post-production, I do all the distribution myself. And of course, I have software that helps me with that. I use Descript for the basic edits and all that sort of stuff. But the reality is that I wouldn't be able to do that if I hadn't have started exercising that content creation, editing, post-production, distribution. If I hadn't started exercising those muscles 8 years ago, I would be way, way behind the curve today. And so now I can adapt my content to whatever format is the flavor of the day. It's very easy for me to do that because I know how to do short form written, long form written, audio, video, and everything in between, including shorts. I now know how to do all those things.
Everything that you have said goes to what I talk about, which is skill stacking. And that's one of the things that I think people don't understand is that when we think about skill stacking, the majority of people think about the immediate relevant stuff. So it's, okay, I'm in sales. Therefore, I need to know how to manage my inbox. I need to know how to sell things, basic sales trainings, all this other stuff. It's like kind of this narrow field. But then, and that's called upskilling. And that's when you're just getting better at your primary skill set. That's fine. That's really important, obviously. But then there's this entire other area of reskilling, which is when you are learning new complementary skills. And for me, if I could go back 10 years ago and tell myself one skill that I needed to learn in sales, I would have said, you need to learn copywriting. It would have made me better in my presentations. It would have made me better at email writing, all of these things that would have been really important. And now, when I quit, similar to you, I took an entire year off. I had been coaching on the side, on top of doing my 9 to 5. And then I knew I was going to do it in a different format, but I said, I'm going to take a year off. And during that year, I learned how to do sound. I learned how to do lighting. I learned how to do public speaking. I got coaching in these areas and paid for cohorts and all these other things. And now, just like you said, I am able to crank out the equivalent of what would cost me thousands of dollars in media to have somebody else shoot it, pay for it, do all these other things. And I can do it at relatively zero cost outside of a couple hours of my time because I have all of these skill sets on top of the knowing how to write a script, knowing how to get a good hook so people will pay attention to your
And
post.
being a natural extrovert and a natural conversationalist, that's
Absolutely.
a foundation skill that you already have, and that's a quality you already have, and that's a gift, right? And I'm lucky. My father's an introvert, my mother's an extreme extrovert, and luckily, from a personality perspective, I take after my mom from a personality perspective, and my dad's highly technical. So from a technical perspective, I take after my dad.
Nice. So you got a little bit of both.
I got the mix there, and so I think. But what I'd like to say is that regardless of whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, regardless of whether you like to write, speak, do video, do audio, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, there is some kind of content that has a value in the world. Your unique set of skills and experiences are what make you unique. There's no one out there like you that has your same set of skills and experiences. So I think that if somebody is looking to bring more freedom into their life, they have to own their personal brand. Even if you are an employee, and even if you have no expectation that you will stop being an employee anytime soon, the one thing an employer cannot take away from you is your personal brand.
I love it.
And so I think that anybody, especially as of 2024, it will give you more freedom, more flexibility, more opportunity, less dependence on an employer. It will bring so many good things to your life that you may not even be able to fathom what that what those good things are yet.
And it's what's the
Trust me,
downside? It takes a little bit of
there's
time
no
and
negative.
effort. There's no
There's no negative.
downside. I totally agree with you. I think that personal branding, we talk about this a lot in my mastermind with people, because I'm like, look, ultimately what we're trying to solve for is to make as much money as possible in the least amount of time so we can dedicate all of our resources living the life that we want. Ultimately, that's all that we're trying to solve for. I haven't been able to find a more effective way to do that in the modern age than having a strong personal brand. Because yes, as an entrepreneur, there's a lot of obvious benefits to that, with inbound leads and business and speaking gigs and all these other things. Like, yeah. But if you're an employee, like you said, working 9 to 5, there's job security that comes with it. There's, depending on the nature of your job, if you're in sales, people might pick up the phone for you more. Like, there's a lot of other benefits that come with it, even from the 9 to 5 perspective. What have you done that for somebody who has a pretty well baked out brand, you have a really good following on LinkedIn, put out great content? What is something that you would recommend to someone who's at ground zero but has interest? And they're like, hey, I want to get a small win here. I want to start developing my personal brand. What would you recommend to somebody if they're starting at ground zero there in order to start developing that?
Look, I think the first thing is you have to create for yourself first, an audience second. Now, most people will tell you the other way around. They say, write with the audience in mind. I think that's fine if you've got a decent sized following, if you've got 5, 10, 15, 20,000 followers on whatever platforms you're on or whatever, then of course, maybe you have to be a little bit more cautious about consistency, things like that. But I think when you're first starting out, you will never stick with something that you don't love and enjoy doing. It's that simple.
Right.
I still, to this day, I spend about 8 hours a week doing nothing but content.
Okay.
That includes recording, post-production, writing posts on social, being active on Reddit, being active across all the channels I'm active on, and then doing the post-production, distribution, doing the translation stuff now, all that kind of stuff. So I spend about 8 hours a week, and I still do that to this day. And this is 8 years into building a personal brand.
Mm-hmm.
But I love it. And I still only do things that I love. And I still only produce content in formats that I love. I still only write about topics that I enjoy. And I think, and I'd like to think that comes through, that's palpable and it's tangible in the energy that I bring to my podcast interviews, that I bring to my LinkedIn posts, that I bring to the responses that I do on Reddit or Quora. I think that my energy and my love of my industry and the topics that I talk about, I'd like to think that it's pretty transparent, that I love it, that I'm not doing it just to build a brand. I'm not doing it just to create pipe for my business. I'm not doing it to establish expertise. I'm not doing it to meet people that I can sell to. I'm doing it first and foremost because I love having conversations with people about the topics related to my industry. Like, it jazzes me up. It fires me up. I look forward to getting up every day and doing what I'm doing. I look forward to consulting with new clients. I look forward to helping them build their businesses. I look forward to watching them succeed. And I look forward to giving back to an industry that has allowed me to live the life that I live today. So
that's a really cool way to put that. I like that.
I oftentimes say about my podcast in particular, it's my love letter back to my industry.
That's good.
Right? Because look, this industry has been really good to me. Like, the people that I've met, the friendships I've formed, the income I've made, the fun times out at conferences and after parties, and just the travel I've been able to do around the world. Like, it's led to a very blessed life. And I think that it's incumbent upon us, because I was mentored when I first started in the industry. I had people around me that were more knowledgeable, smarter, better than me, and they sent the letter back down for me. And I feel it's incumbent upon me to send the letter back down for everybody else behind.
That's great.
And I just feel the weight of that responsibility. And so therefore, I'm always trying to put out the absolute best content I can possibly produce for my industry, for people that are even maybe just remotely interested in looking at my industry as a career. It's not just for people that are already working in e-commerce, omnichannel, digital retail, whatever it is. And so for me, I get a lot of satisfaction and personal reward. It's very rewarding for me to do what I do from a content perspective, not just because I love it and I enjoy it, but I get messages all the time. I probably get at least 1 to 2 messages a week in my inbox. In fact, I just got a message in my inbox yesterday on LinkedIn. Oh, I was listening to this podcast episode the other day, and you just said one thing in passing that was a throwaway comment about how you have a separate Gmail inbox just for all your subscription-based emails. So like I subscribe to a lot of industry newsletters. I subscribe to Google alerts around topics in my industry so that I don't miss anything major, all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, I don't
Spare
have
the
that
main
sent to my
inbox.
I don't have to have that sent to my main inbox. I got like a crappy Gmail account that all that stuff goes into that I monitor and I can filter for, and it becomes a source of new topics for me to talk about that are current and are happening in my industry. And I've got that in my inbox every single day. And he was like, that one little tip. He goes, I don't know why I didn't think of doing that before. He goes, but I get a lot of crap in my inbox. He goes, and I'm a lot of newsletters. I'm going to now go and set up my own crappy Gmail account for all my subscription emails. He goes, that was a great idea. And he goes, I've been listening to your podcast for years. And he said, that one just stuck out as a super cool tip that you got. It was a throwaway idea that you use yourself in your own business. And I was just like, thank you, because you never know where your content is going to land and how it might benefit someone.
That is something that the way that I like to say it is this. When you are somebody who's trying to build a personal brand and you don't know at any stage of the game, really, if anything, this is probably more important as you're further along. But if you are building your personal brand actively, one of the most important things I think that somebody can remember is that your audience, the people that you are speaking to, is dumb. And because and the reason you want to keep that mindset is not to say that they're all idiots or something, but it's important to remember that the things that are obvious and simple to us is not obvious and simple to somebody else for whatever reason, right? We're all coming and we have different perspectives on things. I listen to people in sales. I've been doing sales for 14 years, but they'll say something and it's so simple. And I'm like, why did I not think of that? So it's like, the best things that you can do is just go, my audience is dumb, so I need to keep things simple and clear and concise. And if you do that, you will produce incredible content. Sure, you can talk about more complicated and complex topics as well. But like you said, this guy had been listening to you for a long time. He'd probably heard you talk about all the big time, in-depth topics. But then you made this one little simple offhand thing that you do, and it was this light bulb moment for him. And you just don't know what's going to land sometimes. You talk to big creators and they're constantly shocked at the video that ends up going viral. I put so much little effort into that one compared to this one, and it did way better. So you just don't know. So just do it and keep that in mind. I think it's great advice. I know we're coming up on time here. To flip the floor over to you and just open it up, parting words for somebody who is out there, you obviously are passionate about your work. Fortunately, it seems like you're living with the person that you love in a place that you love, right? Like you're living that definition of success. If you could leave some imparting wisdom for people who are trying to design the life that they want, what would just be one thing that you would want to shout from the mountaintops for everybody to hear?
My suggestion is travel as often and as widely as you can so that you can see the world through somebody else's lens and hone your empathy skills, because we're not all born with them. The reality is that you will be more successful in business the more empathy you have. Empathy for your audience, empathy for your family, empathy for your friends, empathy for your community, empathy for your clients. If you can literally imagine yourself in their world, in their shoes, living their life, you will automatically become a better business person. You become a better human. I would venture to say that it's almost impossible to put out content at scale over a super long period of time unless you have some sense of empathy in your life. I think it's very difficult. And so I think those two things. I think traveling and even living for a month, 2 months, you don't have to permanently move like my wife and I have done. But if you can go and live in another country for 1, 2, 3 months, stay in an Airbnb, whatever it is, if you can do that, I tell you, it will give you such a new frame on the world. It will give you new insights into the world. It will give you an insight into new cultures. And it will make you a more rounded business person too. Because when I'm speaking to clients in the US, because I've done so much traveling and speaking in the US, I understand the mindset of US business people. I understand Latin American mindsets and how you have to communicate with people in Latin America. I know, obviously, the Asian culture through my wife and her family and my friends. I know how to do business in ANZ and what's different and unique about that. So I think the more travel you do, the more it doesn't just make you a better human, it makes you more well-rounded as a human, and that will by definition make you a better business person, a better employee, a better business builder. It will just make your life better. Because I tell you, when you live and grow up and die in the same echo chamber, it makes you very one-dimensional. And so therefore, you become one-dimensional in your problem solving. You become one-dimensional in how you view the world. It can make you bitter and angry. Oftentimes, I think Americans, they get so wrapped up in the mainstream media because they actually don't know, because they believe what the mainstream media tells them about the rest of the world. And for example, I'll just use one example. Most Americans think everybody would live in America if they could. They think that every single person on the planet, if they had the opportunity to live in the US, they would. And that's just bullshit, frankly. There are
honestly, I think the tide is turning on a lot of that, whether that's good or not. Nationalism is really down with us, but I totally get what you're saying. Yeah.
And Americans are fans of saying, Ross Iskenbaugh, best country in the world, best economy in the world, best everything in the world, best military in the world, best everything. How do you know if you've never traveled? And over 50% of Americans don't even have a passport. So the reality is, how the hell do you really know that America is the best country in the world if you've never been anywhere else? And if your lens on the rest of the world comes from mainstream media and you don't know anybody from those countries, you don't speak their language, you don't eat their food, how the hell do you know? And so I think I'm fond of saying that many Americans, not all, but many Americans have an underlying level of ignorant arrogance. It's arrogance born out of ignorance. And I think the quickest way to eliminate ignorance from your life is to travel.
Yep. I totally agree with you. And I'll throw a challenge out there to people. It's, listen, I get it. Things are expensive right now. It can be a little tough to be like, hey, I'm just going to go globetrot and different things like that. But to just challenge people on this point, okay, that's fine. Go hang out with somebody at your job that has a different point of view than you. Go eat at a restaurant that's a type of food that you normally don't like very much. You know, strike up a conversation with the waiter from there. What was that?
Or that you know nothing about.
Or that you know nothing about. Because the great thing about America, like when I went to China, it was crazy. I went there in 2018, and people would stop me on the street to take pictures with me and my dad because we ended up in places and some of them had never seen a white person before, or very few of us. So it was very homogenous there. We don't have that problem in the United States. We are very much, obviously, a bunch of mutts. Like, we're from all over the place. That's great. So it's like, you don't have to go to another city in almost anywhere in America to meet somebody that is not from, or at least has some background of a different culture than you. So it's like, I totally endorse traveling. I totally endorse going overseas. Or shoot, let's talk about the difference between an Alabama and a New York. Massively different places, right? And each state will argue why theirs is better than the other. And that's totally fine. We love where we live, okay? But to your point, I think it's just an important message in general, whether you're traveling down the street or across the office aisle to talk to somebody that has a different culture, a different perspective, a different religious or political mindset than you, or you're going across the ocean to somewhere else. I think now more than ever, especially for us in America in this very toxic election year that we're having, it's just important to remember the fact that, guess what? I know this about people for sure. It doesn't matter if I'm in Gainesville, Florida, or if I'm talking to a couple in Shanghai, China. Guess what? That wife yells at her husband for not unloading the dishwasher properly. It's like that guy probably works really hard and comes home and doesn't feel appreciated some days. It's like, we are going to express these things differently, but at the same time, we're all humans and we're going to feel and go through a lot of the similar life experiences, and we can all at least respect each other based off that. All right, we'll end it on that, man. I think it's a great message. Love it. And to feel very kindred spirits with you on a lot of things here. So I really enjoy the talk. Tell me, where can people find you? LinkedIn, obviously. Punch in your name, but anywhere else where people can find you, name of the podcast, please drop it in and I'll make sure that I have it in the description too so people can check it out.
Love it. Thank you so much. Yeah, we've got a back catalog of over 420 episodes of nice. It's on every podcast engine, including YouTube and Rumble. If they want to go to my website and find out more about what I do, they may not be interested, but if they are, greenwoodconsulting.net. And then I put out most of my content, or at least teasers for almost all of my content, on LinkedIn. And I'm about shortly to launch a wait list for a new B2B e-commerce community that I'm going to be setting up over the next couple of months. I'll be putting all that information on my website shortly as well.
Awesome. Well, send it to me. And like I said, I'll have it for anybody looking. The links will be in the description. You can check it out there. And yeah, man, thanks so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I love it. Thank you so much. If you'd like to get mentored by Jason for free, head over to greenwoodconsulting.net, scroll to the bottom of the page, and click Get Mentored by Jason.